Welcome back to another episode of the Shift with Elena Agar podcast. In this conversation, I chatted with Meghan Slipka. We talked about embracing uncertainty in your career path, the importance of flexibility, and reframing your skills for new roles. Meghan shared her daily wellness practices like yoga. She's also a certified yoga instructor, which I found was really interesting, and insightful tips on handling guilt in business. We also delved into the value of mentorship and aligning your career with your personal values. So if you're navigating a career transition or looking for ways to boost your leadership skills, this episode is definitely for you. She shares a lot of tips and strategies that I think are just super practical and easy to implement. So join the conversation. As always, comment, share, subscribe, and keep coming back for more. Meghan, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and to talk with you.
So you and I met because you delivered an excellent session on leadership to the Women in Tech Network. Is that what WIT, right? The Women in Tech Network, I think that's the name of it. Yeah. So, and I was like, okay, we have to chat. I liked what you were saying. So we're going to dive into some of that leadership stuff. We're going to dive into kind of your own career and how you got to what you wanted to kind of be. So what you became today, essentially. But before that, I want to kind of dive into, what is like one thing that people typically don't know about you? What's an interesting thing people don't know about you?
Yeah. Not everyone might know that I'm a pretty avid yoga practitioner. I'm actually certified at the 200-hour as well to teach yoga. And I started practicing probably 11 or so years ago, maybe just over 10, and just fell in love with it. And it is something that is an integral part of my life. Like when I do not make time to have a yoga practice, I can feel it in my day to day. So that is something that I love. I love the practice of it and the philosophy behind it. And I make time for it every week.
That is so fascinating because it's so interesting because the work that you do in leadership, and I always wonder because I see, a lot of coaches out there, right? Like a lot of leadership development folks and so on. And I feel like everybody has that piece of mindfulness or something else because you have to almost practice something. For me, it's personal training. So I do personal training as well. So, and now I'm getting my nutritionist. So everything I do is incorporating this. So I'd imagine that everything you do within corporates and coaching space also incorporates a lot of the kind of pillars of yoga and meditation and all of that. Do you incorporate all that in your coaching practice?
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting observation, and it's very true in that when we people who are in, the leadership space or the coaching space, there is so much work around just mindset and really focusing on how we're thinking and practices of just awareness. And for me, that certainly started when I started practicing yoga and even just being aware of my body and what it was doing and how I was breathing. And then, of course, it moves further into, awareness of your mind and those sorts of things. But it all kind of integrates together in just this sense of, who are you, having a firm belief in yourself, and then also having no expectations and being kind of flexible to see what comes and goes, both in a work environment and then also in your practice when you have a physical practice as well. So that start of that journey certainly would have led me to this type of work that I do today.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's very interesting to see this because I feel like it all works together. You can't, when you're to your point, to be self-aware, you have to be in tune with your body. It all starts within, internally, a calm mindset, right? A healthy body and so on. So we'll get into all of that, but let's start with your career story, because before you got into that, you had a career in corporate. So walk me through that. I want to know what you studied. I'm always curious, what did people study and then what did you end up doing? So tell me.
Yeah, certainly. So my education is in psychology, and I did both my bachelor's and master's in psychology. I just always had a draw towards just the study of human behavior. And it was fascinating. I loved it. I always felt very energized in it. But I always knew that I never wanted to be a clinical psychologist. Which is kind of interesting because I think full circle, a lot of the coaching work I do is very similar to elements of therapy and clinical psychology. They're very different, but there are some similarities between the two. So it is kind of funny that I've ultimately found myself right where I intentionally thought I would never go. But I studied psychology. I worked in a nonprofit environment for a while, and then found myself in a corporate world, specifically within the GovCon community in the DC area. And in that time, I was challenged in a lot of different ways. I grew within that particular position and within that particular company. And as I grew into more leadership positions, found myself not knowing the answers to things, found myself faced with a lot of new challenges that I didn't know how to navigate. And it was at that time that I sought out coaching for myself as a way to kind of help me work through all of this. I had found myself connected to my coach at the time, who was wonderful. Her name's Krista Davis. She's the best. And she really helped support me. She helped me really work through some of the challenges that I found myself facing in that leadership position. And it was really a monumental experience for me. It really helped me to shift the perspective on work and how I showed up to work and what my value was and how I contribute in a workplace setting. And so I knew when that happened, I needed to at some point help other people go through that journey as well, because it was so impactful for me. And while I didn't know exactly what that would look like, I was able to shift kind of quickly into a freelance consultancy model. So I could go out on my own. I had clients that I could start working with, consulting with them. And then over the course of a couple of years, I was able to, get my certification, get additional training, and build up all of my knowledge and skills in the coaching specifically, so that I could add that into the work that I do. So now, full circle, I am kind of still studying human behavior, leveraging some of those experiences I had, and then really helping people within the corporate workplace navigate those challenges themselves.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love hearing the career stories because it's never like a straight shot, and it's always interesting. But it's like, but it always like I've run this podcast. This is like I'm close to 200 episodes now. And so over the last 4 years, and that's always my first question is like, what did you study, and kind of go deep into it. And it's always goes back to like majority of the time, it's like, well, when I was younger, I wanted to do this thing, but then I kind of went this route, and you end up coming back to this thing you actually really wanted to do. In your case, like human behavior and
Yeah.
how do we become better? And then you tie in the yoga piece to it. And so it's like your whole, and it's, I wonder, like, and in your experience working with, particular women in the workplace, like, because I think women also have this, well, men as well, but like when you become a mother and a father, it's almost like you forget about yourself. And then, you put so much focus on like what you need to do versus what's truly aligned with your kind of wants and needs and fulfillment from a career or business perspective. So I'm
Right.
curious, like, what do you see as a trend? Is there a theme of people that are like kind of like where do they go? Where do they start with?
Yeah, well, I do think that one kind of commonality that I see, especially people early in their career, is sort of a lack of knowing where they want to go. There are certainly those people who always knew they wanted to be a doctor, or always kind of had this draw to go, a legal path or be a business owner. But I would say the majority of people really don't know, and they're open to possibilities, and they don't have a strong sense. And for whatever reason, we give more value to knowing what it is you want to do versus not knowing. But
Mm-hmm.
once you kind of open with, hey, I don't know, I'm open to possibilities. I never had a strong sense of what my profession was going to be. So many people raise their hands to say, oh, that's me too. And while we don't give as much value to that, I think it actually is really beneficial to allow yourself to kind of take the path that comes before you, see what happens, and be exposed to a lot of different things. And then from there, learn what you like, what you don't like, and then, kind of create a path that works best for you. When I do trainings, especially with people who are early in their careers or who are trying to figure out what their career looks like, I always remind people that, like, you don't have to know exactly what it looks like. And it almost is better to be open to the possibilities and just let your particular desires and your interests guide you in those particular moments instead of staying on one track. So I think that's a common thing that I see amongst people.
Yeah. Unpack that for me, because I also like interact with a lot of younger people, and it's like, they're like, I think for you and I, having gone through that journey, it's easy to say like, listen, just kind of trust and go with it. But what does that
Yeah.
look like in action? Like, how do you know if you're on the right track? Like, even if you don't know, but how do you know that this next step is the right step? Like, is there a way to know?
Yeah, yeah. I, I think I would kind of answer that or offer two perspectives on that. So, one is sort of an external view of it, meaning, am I using my strengths? Am I offering something in this particular role that feels aligned to what I can do? And so it can be as simple as, I'm a really good writer, but this particular position is really requiring me to do a lot of like forward facing communications. That's not my strength. I want something that's more writing focused. That's an indication that, maybe you're not quite aligned in where you need to be. The other is something that's more internal. And a lot of the work that I do with my clients is focused on our values and what are the drivers in our work lives. So are we driven in our work by, the community? Is it collaboration? Is it accomplishment or recognition? Having some sense of what your internal values are can help you determine whether or not your current position is aligned to that. And I think you have to look at that values assessment both in terms of your individual position and also the organization or company as a whole that you work with. When they're aligned, then it feels right. It feels like you can contribute because there's that commonality there. When they're misaligned, that's a good indication that, you might want to look for a different opportunity, or the opportunity that is presented to you might not be the best fit for you and what is important to you in your work.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. I think the alignment of values is essential, which is why like it's hard to know your values. Sometimes that's why you get coaches. Like, I mean, for me, I spend
Mhm.
thousands of dollars honestly on coaches in my
Yeah.
personal life to like figure out what my values are, which just sounds really stupid, but like, that you don't know, but you don't know because there's so many. It's like, what are your top five, right? Like, what are
I
the
know.
things that are like deal breakers for you? And
Yeah.
it's easy. It's not as easy as one might think when you start going deeper,
Yes. I
into
think
that.
it's people don't often make the time to really think through
Hmm.
what those are. And there's also it's difficult to narrow it down because we also get a little bit of like that shiny object syndrome where we see someone else who says, "Oh, well, my value is service." And we think like, "Ooh, that's a good value.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll add that one." And
Yeah.
we kind of just move around based on what we're seeing and hearing instead of really like getting rid of the noise, taking some time and really focusing and making sure that those are the correct values for you. Once you do that, once you have a good understanding of it, then it becomes easier to live in those values. But I
Mm,
do always say there has to be kind of some sort of cadence to reflect on them and change them if needed because we're human. Things are different and our priorities shift over time. So you do always have to revisit them and see if they
mhm,
need to shift a little bit, but making that time is the first thing you can do to just establish what those values are.
mm. That makes sense. I never thought of it from that perspective. I always say like, well, values is just who you are. It's what you believe in. But you're to your point, when priorities change, sometimes you like when you become a parent versus a
Yep.
single young professional with no, responsibilities outside of your own self,
Yep.
values might change, of course, and you don't want to even know until it actually happens to you, and then you're like, oh, like I need to
Yep.
adjust some things. So that's
Yep.
interesting. Mm,
Yeah, one of the common things I think we see and hear is this concept of, like, I really want to advance in my career. I want to get a top position, or I want to be a big earner within my career. I want to make a lot of money. I want to feel like very secure. And then there's like this shift that sometimes happens where it's like, I'm not getting fulfilled by the work I do. I want to like give back more. I want to work for an organization that is actually more impactful, or I want to
mm,
have a closer tie to the people I'm working with. That kind of theme that often is played out in the workplace is something that I think is a good demonstration of value shifting. It starts in one thing and then it kind of bleeds into something different later in life.
mm. I'm curious your thoughts on this. I was actually listening to David Epstein. I don't know how to pronounce last name, but the guy who wrote Ranch. I don't know if you know the book
Hmm,
Ranch. So it's a
I
book
haven't read
basically
it
about
now,
like
but
how the generalists are going to rule the world type thing. So moving away from the 10,000 hours expertise to then like kind of becoming more general. And
mm,
I see this trend, at least in my practice, like I see this trend where especially with layoffs and just kind of uncertainty of the job market, uncertainty of like just the organizational restructures and mergers and acquisition, all these things that are kind of happening around us. And I see that people that are able to kind of, task switch and have multiple areas of expertise, let's put it that way, or like 2, 3 of areas where they can really kind of add value to a company. I see those individuals kind of sticking within the company longer than those that are very tunnel vision focused. So
Mhm.
as you work with people, like women in particular, do you work with a lot of career change seekers, and do you see some of that? Like, do you see any
Mm.
limitations? Or like, what do you see in terms of the job market, at least for at the moment?
Yeah, I see a lot of I see that there's often this sense of needing to reframe what we think are very specific skills into things that are a bit more general and broad. We often don't see that for ourselves, but when we really think through what it takes to switch into a different role or to switch into a different position, a lot of things are applicable between the two, especially if we kind of talk about, competencies in specific areas. So competencies in communication or in writing or stakeholder management, whatever that looks like for you in a specific position can sometimes seem very niche and very specific to that role, but oftentimes it is applicable to other areas. So a lot of times when I'm working with clients, there's this sense of trying to draw those commonalities and parallels so that you can kind of understand how to present yourself, especially in an interview or talking or networking to people. But then there's also this kind of element on the back end when you actually do step into a new role that might be a little bit different, or it might be a stretch of some of those skills, remembering that you have the capacity to learn more and you have the capacity to strengthen in certain areas, learn more about a particular industry in order to lean on those competencies and expand them. I do think, generally speaking, though, this concept of like knowing one thing really well, the 10,000 hours thing versus, having multiple different areas, I think it really depends on what those strengths are, what those skills are, and the goal that you have for yourself. In some
Mm,
ways, it's much more applicable to have like a more generalist perspective or view. In other areas, it's simply not. So I think it's kind of case by case and what it is you're looking for, what you're seeking, and also the particular skills that you bring.
mm. How has mentorship played a role in your own career or business development?
Yeah, mentorship is something that I currently put a lot of time into, but when I was early in my career, I did not spend enough time seeking mentors for myself. It's something that I regret, but I know why I didn't. At the time when I felt like I needed guidance, I needed mentorship. I felt that because I didn't know the answers or because I had to kind of reveal, like, how do I do this? That was in some way a negative thing. And so I avoided seeking those mentors. Um, and now, now that I'm in a position where I provide coaching, I really offer mentorship to a lot of different people who are early in their career or who are trying to navigate what their career looks like. I specifically work with women in technology in the DC area, Women's Impact Alliance as well, which is another great organization, nonprofit for women leaders. And I offer my time to mentor people within those organizations because I know how important it is. But the great thing about those mentorship relationships is that I also learn a lot from the people that I'm mentoring. Mentorship is definitely a two-way street. There are
Yeah.
things where they're coming to me with questions and then I'm learning a lot from them as well. And now that I'm later in my career, I have learned that there's like no bad question. I'm not supposed to know it all. And so I have no qualms about seeking out my own mentors and being like, I don't know what I'm doing. And my mentors now look a little bit different. They're also coaches. They're also, executives at companies. They're people who have grown their own businesses. But now I have, I'll just go up to anyone and ask any question because I know it's both valuable to get that information, but there's something that I might not recognize that I'm offering my mentor that they're also finding value in as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like it that you kind of like you're just open to ask for that, because I think a lot of people will look for a very formal mentorship, but sometimes it is just asking a question.
Yep.
Like you meet somebody or you see somebody have done something maybe on LinkedIn or maybe in their community or maybe at an event, and asking, I think it's called like mentorship moments. I forgot where I've heard that term from,
I
but
love
it's
that.
like
Yeah.
mentorship moments where it doesn't have to be a formal mentorship experience. You can just be curious and like ask the question. I think a lot of young people, at least, they come to me and they're like, I don't know how to find a mentor. Like I don't, because it's like, hey, can you be my mentor for the next 6 months? It's not like that. Like it's more,
Right. Right.
right? So, in my case, I also found useful, in case anybody's listening might be useful, but to your point, organizations like the ones you mentioned, but also like small business associations. There's different ones in different parts of the US, right? Like, and they offer mentorship, they offer free mentorship. Score, I have a great mentor through Score,
Mm-hmm.
who's been phenomenal. It's free. It's a really great tool and resource, but there's a lot of them like the ones that you're part of as well.
Yeah, I do get that similar question of like, how do I ask someone to be my mentor, or like, will you be my mentor? And you're right, it doesn't work that way. It kind
Yeah.
of just works by just general authentic connection and
Yeah.
talking with people, learning a little bit more about them, learning how they handled a situation that might be similar to yours. And over time, the questions become more pointed. How would you handle this? What do you think about this particular thing? But it's never really this, will you be my mentor? Can we meet every Tuesday? It's not usually that prescribed. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of building a team around you that you can go to depending on those specific questions to help
Yeah.
guide you through that. I really love the mentor moments too. It's
Yeah.
these little questions and moments in time that help kind of build the mentorship framework.
Mm. When did you know that it was the right time for you to kind of go full on with your own coaching and consulting, and when did you
Mm,
feel it's the right time?
yeah, I felt, I guess, in the moment that I had experienced coaching myself, I knew that I wanted to give back to the people who were going to be growing in their careers behind me. And I wanted to be able to offer that same support. I knew almost right away when I had coaching that I needed to do that. But it took some time before I actually went through the process of getting certified and even kind of built up my own confidence in my ability to do it, and then really like launched it as part of my business offering. So I think I knew in that moment, but the subsequent moment, it was nothing particularly groundbreaking. But for me, when it comes to, I think just my life in general, but also workplace specific decisions, there's often like a moment of real clarity where I can see like how something will play out. And that is usually an indication that that's the right decision for me. I guess it's a little bit of an intuitive hit. So if I can like understand what the pathway before me could look like, that's a reassurance that that's the path I should take. And so for me, with the coaching specifically, that kind of started to percolate and become clear in like 2020. And then I was like,
Mm.
okay, these are the steps I need to take. And even if it doesn't go that way, it's a possibility. And that is enough of an kind of information for me to know that that's the way I should be going.
Mm. How did you manage because even if you know the pathway forward, it's still change, and change is
Mhm.
still, scary, exciting, it's a lot of things. So how do you manage through something like that? And how do you help your clients maybe manage through their career transitions?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's an absolutely accurate observation. When I saw the path before me, what it was is not at all what I'm doing now. But I knew I just needed to kind of take those initial steps in
Mm-hmm.
order to get to where I am today. When I'm working with clients, especially who are, maybe doing a career transition, or they're trying to get into a senior leadership role, whatever it may be for them, what I say is the one certainty is uncertainty. You just can't predict and control everything. And there are too many external factors outside of your control that are going to impact what that path is. And so ultimately, it's remaining flexible and being, agile to what's coming. And then also remembering that the uncertainty exists and you kind of have to ride the wave. Whenever you start to resist that and think, oh, it should be this way, or why isn't this path going the way I thought it would? Is it something about me? Is it something I'm doing wrong? And we kind of like take the weight on, we take the weight of that like unpredictable path as something that we did personally, that is when it gets more challenging. So recognizing that the path is going to change, there's a lot of external factors, and kind of going with the flow of it, I think can release a lot of that frustration that comes along with some of those external factors that impact what is happening.
Mm. What are some routines that you do to take care of your well-being throughout this process?
Yeah. Well, yoga is a big one. That is a huge practice of mine that I really consider. The other thing that has been helpful for me, especially now that I am on my own, I'm a solo entrepreneur. I don't have the same team that I had in a corporate setting. It has been really helpful to have a strong awareness of when I feel like I'm very motivated and when I feel like I am, off balance, or when I feel like I'm stressed, and start to identify trends in that. So I actually started to really look at, when do I feel great and motivated, and when do I feel like extra overwhelmed and stressed out. And there are cycles for me. And I think this is true probably for everyone. If you look at it, there are times when I am better suited to take on certain challenges and times when I am not. So I've looked at it from a weekly perspective, a monthly perspective, and even like an annual perspective. And the annual information has been the most useful for me. I find that I am really motivated and engaged and in like a flow state in like the late winter and fall time periods. And so I leave those periods of the year as when I'm going to start doing like a lot of strategy for my business, or when I'm going to, engage in a new certification that's going to challenge me, or I might be resisting in some way. I use those periods of time to take on different challenges, and I don't kind of hold myself to the fire when it's, the dead of summer and I just don't have it and I'm
Yeah.
stressed out. I'm not having the expectations that like that's the time when I need to take certain action.
Mm.
That's been really helpful for me, and something that I share with my clients as well. Like really start to gain some awareness around what is working and what isn't and why. And then when you're in those places of like, I'm super stressed out, you don't have as much of an expectation that you should be doing something different.
Mm. I think that's such an interesting point because I like that totally makes sense. Like when you're like, hey, like fall and winter is just where it's at for me. And then like I don't feel as guilty not doing something over that end of summer.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting because I've struggled with that. And over the years I've had a business in the past as well. And it was like one of those things where I felt like I had to go, go, go. And only
Mm-hmm.
in the last couple of years, I started to ask myself, like, do I actually have to do this today?
Mm-hmm.
And actually say no and not feel guilty about it. That has been like a really, really big game changer for me because I realize I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think a lot of people do, especially if you're like freelancing, entrepreneur, trying to build a small business. You put a lot of pressure on yourself, and then what helped me is like again like asking myself, I still do this every weekend because I tend to work like 6 days a week at least.
Yeah.
And if it's like a day off, I'm like I feel guilty for not working, but now I'm
Right.
much better at having those conversations with myself, like I don't actually have to do this will not
Mhm.
make or break anything.
Right.
Like
Exactly. It's
I can
really,
take a day. Yeah.
yeah, it is hard for business owners. It feels like you have to always be doing something in order to like better your business, or
Hmm.
see that growth. But there's a lot of value in stepping back and not feeling guilty at those times. And it's likely that the days when you take a day off, or the weeks where you don't have it in you to like do all of that, there's a reason behind that. And it could be because, your clients aren't really interested in your service in that particular moment, or there's other influences that have led you to create that schedule for yourself. It's just a matter of remembering that, having that awareness, and then, giving yourself a little bit of a grace when you actually take that time and not feeling like the shame or the guilt around it, because that's really not helping you in any way.
Yeah. Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where do you hang out at the most? Somebody wants to maybe hear some of your talks that you do or book a coaching session with you.
Yep. Yeah. I am Predominantly on LinkedIn, if you want to follow along for all of my social media. I'm also on Instagram, and it's just my name, Meghan Slipka. My Instagram is Meghan Slipka Coaching. And then my website is a great resource to find all of the different services I offer, from coaching to training to consulting efforts as well.
Sounds good. I'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes. Last question I ask all of my guests. What is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Hmm, that's a good question. Um, the first thing that I thought of was a question that I wish people would ask themselves in any moment is, how am I feeling? And some people, I think, do ask that a little bit or have a sense, but I would actually ask the next question on beyond that, which is, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? I think that gives a lot of insight into the core root cause of a lot of the stressors that we feel, or a lot of the frustrations, or a lot of the limitations that we're experiencing in ourselves. And so to give yourself the opportunity to understand why you're feeling a certain way, especially within all of the stressors of work, asking yourself that question, the answer, I think, will reveal a lot of value and insight and help you to navigate what those challenges are.
Mm, beautiful. Well, Megan, thank you so much. I look forward to staying connected with you. And until next time.
Thank you.